Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rena Rinaldi, Editorial Director for Chicago Ideas. Welcome, and thank you for joining us for this important conversation on the state of Chicago's arts organizations following the devastating impact of COVID-19. We'll also discuss recent calls for greater inclusivity and racial equity within arts leadership. I'd like to introduce our moderator guiding today's discussion. She is co-anchor and correspondent for our partner WTTW's Chicago Tonight. Please welcome Brandis Friedman.
I swear I know how to work Zoom. Thank you, Rena. And thank you for having me. It's been an unbelievable time of upheaval in Chicago's arts and cultural scene. The COVID-19 crisis has forced organizations to confront the debilitating reality of empty galleries, closed stages. And in recent weeks, calls for racial equality and representation is beginning to change how we will experience art and culture in Windy City. And I think some of the news that we've heard of the last week or so has been further evidence of that. So today we have a very incredible list of a group of leaders in this space. So I'm going to jump right in and start with Chris Jones, of course, the theater critic, the cultural columnist for the Chicago Tribune. He has had his finger on the pulse of the theater and art scene in our city for over 2 decades. Please welcome Chris Jones. Hi, Chris.
How are you? Nice to see you.
I'm great, thank you. So if you would, set the scene for us, pun intended. What's the latest? Very clever, I know. What's the latest on how organizations are doing and who'll survive, who might not?
Well, I wish I could feel more optimistic than I do. It's a grim scene at the moment. I think what we're seeing right now is the effects of several weeks leading into months of a lack of earned revenue at the box office for any sort of live entertainment organization. And that means that for many of these organizations, expenses have continued, property taxes continued, mortgages in some cases have continued, and payroll has continued. So that's led definitely to financial stress on many of our most beloved arts organizations. And I'm talking here about everything from famous names down to the grassroots storefront scene that is so important in the Chicago DNA. And I think the problems as we sit here today, and this is an ever-changing scenario, as you well know, Brandis, is uncertainty fundamentally, that people don't know when they can reopen, and that much of what gets done in the arts requires 2 things that are very important. One is planning, because contracts have to be handed out and that kind of thing. And the other is capital investment. So in other words, if a big dance company is doing a major production, it has to spend a lot of that money up front. It simply does not typically have the margins to allow or to risk that show not happening. So we're seeing a lot of arts organizations just simply unable to produce with confidence in an environment where they and we don't know when they'll be back.
Chicago, of course, has an unparalleled and a very rich history and reputation for its world-class theater. What's it going to look like post-COVID-19?
I don't know. I don't know. I think it is very difficult to predict. I think there is some evidence that there will be fewer institutions. We've already seen in the past few days the exit of several companies, the Mercury Theater, for example, IO, the Improv Theater. We've seen other theaters postpone for a long period of time. I always think that the mid-size organizations are the most vulnerable in these scenarios. I think the big organizations that have deep roots and sort of deep pocketed boards in some cases will be able to survive. I think they're too important to the city. Everybody knows that. It will be difficult. They may survive in different forms, but I believe they'll survive. And I also think we have a lot of artists in Chicago who have day jobs and who can sort of go quiet for a while, and their institutions can pop back up like pop-ups almost when it's a more friendly environment for that. So I think they'll be okay too, although maybe not in every case. But the real crisis for me is in sort of 2 areas. One is the for-profit organizations that are really struggling because they have no ability to raise money outside of earned revenue, and there is no earned revenue. That's very problematic. That's, I think, we're already seeing the disaster that is that. And then the second one is sort of the mid-sized groups that maybe simply don't have margins to allow themselves to go quiet, but still have payroll and still have significant numbers of staffers. They are having a very hard time too.
Yeah, one of those, legendary theaters in Chicago is, of course, Steppenwolf. I want to bring in artistic director Anna Shapiro. I'm going to wait on her to pop up before I pose the question. There she is. Hi, Anna. Welcome.
Hi, Chris.
Hi, Anna.
So you're obviously artistic director at Steppenwolf. World-class stage and peer cultural programs have been dark since March due to COVID-19. Obviously, you all had just made an announcement yesterday about what it's going to look like for you all in the next season. How has all of this impacted the theater and your company?
Well, it's just been like nothing any of us have ever dealt with before. So that's really kind of the key thing here. Chris and I had a long talk yesterday where we were talking about there aren't a whole lot of surprises. The theater is built on a structure, right? We have a sequence. We're committed to the sequence. Rehearse, you pick the play, then you rehearse it, then you get to move through a process that may have bumps in the road, but it's never a different process. And what we're dealing with now is a completely new experience that none of us have ever been in before. So how has it affected us? There's a lot of negatives, right? We're dark. We can't produce. We're a pretty close staff. Even though we're pretty big, we're still a pretty close staff. We miss each other. We have this long-running joke that we hate our open office, which we do, but we're all now saying we've never missed an open office more. So, but I will also say, Brandis, that it's just made us we've kind of bonded in a different way, and we're trying to respond creatively. So we're trying to find an upside.
Yeah. So I want to bring in the president of the National Museum of Mexican Art in Pilsen, Carlos Tortorello. I'm going to let Carlos pop up. There he is. Hi, Carlos. Welcome. I think you're still on mute. There you are. Hi.
Hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Great.
So of course, the museum, you all are known for your amazing youth and educational programs serving Pilsen and the surrounding communities. Talk a little bit about how the museum is going to be moving forward in this new world. I know you all have done some virtual events as well.
Okay, we're doing a lot of virtual events, which is very, very important for us, showing, theater productions, music, movies, youth activities, senior art classes. We're doing a lot of things. One advantage we have, and of course, we've been hurt by this as well. Everybody's been hurt. One plus about this, we're a free museum. So ticket sales, does not make up any part of our income. So that's a big plus for us. But the one thing I do want to talk about is, I think we have a chance now in this new world to finally come to grips with racism. The arts world does not do it very well. It thinks it does, but it doesn't. And when the arts, I'm talking about, the official arts world, the big institutions. Now is a time, stop talking and let's walk the walk. We really have, and I don't care if you've been the worst arts organization in the world in terms of, dealing with this. Let's put that in the past. Let's move forward now. From this day forward, you have a chance to have a new beginning. And there's no excuse for us not to integrate ourselves and have everybody in our society be part of the arts world. And, the funding needs to be, much equitable. All the studies show this, in which Chicago has done a study that shows how poorly, institutions of color, are funded. So it's a new opportunity. It's a new day. I'm willing to forget what's happened before, but from now on, we have to move forward. If not, this country is going to be in a real mess. So we need to finally deal with this issue of racism, and the arts world, treats it like it's a pimple and you have to put, Claritin on it. No, it's a cancer, racism. It's a tumor. it's going to be painful. We have to move forward, but we have to finally be human beings and treat everybody with, respect. I think, it is opportunity for us to start anew.
Yeah, and we're absolutely going to get to that with this group of leaders today as well, for sure. And I want to correct myself. I said your name wrong. Tortolero, my apologies. Hey, again. So let's also talk about the Chicago music scene. I'm going to bring in Binta Nyambi Brown, head of the business affairs for Nice Work and member of Chance the Rapper's management team. Chance the Rapper, heard of him? I'm going to give Binta a minute to pop up. There she is. Hello and welcome as well. So you are, you're
afternoon.
I don't know what time it is, actually. Hey, is what I'm just going with that. So you're a trained musician yourself, also serve in leadership roles in multiple artistic organizations. What's happening for musical artists right now in this environment?
Well, I mean, it's an interesting time, as it is for everybody. And there are multiple accurate answers to that question, depending on one's, like where they find themselves in the music industry. I mean, obviously, to Chris's point about what's happening in theaters, nobody's touring, and nobody will be touring for a while. And nobody has any idea what touring will look like when it comes back. There are a couple of things that we do know, which is that only the largest acts are expected to tour when touring resumes. That a lot of the mid-cap and small-cap clubs are going to disappear. They were already teetering, and all COVID did was basically say, hey, these are not financially healthy businesses, and they're going to be replaced. That's of particular concern to me because, I got to Chicago from New York, and what we've seen in New York over the course of the last 20 years is a replacement of places where people gather and come together to hear live music and to see live performance with, chains, pharmacies, banks. That's not good for culture. And I'd hate to see that happen also in Chicago, but I'm concerned that it's going to begin accelerating because so many of these smaller venues weren't healthy to begin with. So live performance is off. Most of the artists with whom I'm closely connected have been doing something creatively over the course of the last several months. People have been in the studio, they've been writing, they've been thinking about, they've been taking more time with their music than they've been able to, quite frankly, because normally we're competing against, okay, let's get the music done, let's release the music, and then let's get on the road, let's tour. It's just a really, really aggressive and difficult cycle because so much of our revenue comes from touring. So artists are in the studio, they're writing, they're recording, they're collaborating, they're finding ways to collaborate with one another over Zoom. Peter Cottontail, a Chicago artist with whom I work very closely, he's been doing mixing sessions, mastering sessions, producing sessions, all over Zoom. Now he's beginning to open up his studio again, so people are coming through and they're actually working together in person. It's been an extraordinary time in that regard. The other thing is that I'm very proud to know a group of musicians who, particularly since George Floyd's passing, his murder, to be more accurate, they've been in the streets, they've been protesting, serving the community, not just focusing on their own artistry and promotion of what they do and how they do it, but finding ways to use their celebrity, no matter how big or small that celebrity might be, to serve others and to serve this community. It's been one of the most extraordinary things for me to witness. Sometimes it's frustrating because we're trying to do radio campaigns and get things going with the music, but to take a step back and to service those who are most in need, and to not be thinking about what impact or effect COVID has had on your business or on you personally, but instead to turn this into a moment where we say we're all in this together is extraordinary. Last thing I'll say, and this is to Carlos's point, this is an extraordinary opportunity for us to deal with racism, and particularly in the arts. One of the reasons why I even got involved in music in the first place was because I see it as being the most profound and important form of communication and expression. And when we can get music right, and we can get theater right, which I'm also closely involved with the theater, when we can get these things right, when we can get film right, We actually have the ability to affect the way we think about ourselves and one another. And as long as there's any form or degree of racism within the arts, within entertainment, within music, it's going to continue to reverberate out throughout the rest of our culture. So we have to be able to fix those things. And I quite frankly have never been more hopeful than I am right now. I think that we have an extraordinary and unprecedented time, and it's just amazing to see the way everybody's been coming together to address these things.
It's good when we can find, that bit of hope amid, all the madness that we're all living through right now. Let's talk about the ballet. I want to bring in the executive director of the Joffrey Ballet, Greg Cameron. Almost. So, and Greg, while you're punching up, hey there's Greg Cameron. Hi.
Hi, Brandis.
So, of course, sadly, you had to cancel the rest of the 2020 season, including your annual Nutcracker, which is a significant portion of your revenue for the Joffrey. And that's especially hard because this was the 25th anniversary season. Tell us about the challenges that you're facing, both financially for the organization, but also as you look to diversity, something that, we've already been talking about a little bit, and we'll talk about some more in the time we have.
Sure. Well, it's a pleasure to be with esteemed colleagues and talking about the value and the importance of the art, and fun to add dance to the mix. And although the Joffrey's name is the Joffrey Ballet, I assure you that we are about movement and dance way beyond ballet. And we currently, are doing what we can do in that virtual space. Our academy is offering over 80 classes a week. We have students participating up until the conclusion of the public school year. Our community engagement team was creating e-learning opportunities for the youth of Chicago to continue to dance. And of course, our company artists. We have 45 artists in the Joffrey Ballet, and they have been out of the studio since March 13th. We've done our best to provide them with Marley in their apartments locally, and some of them are back in their home countries. But needless to say, a dancer really cannot do what they need to do remotely. And I think one of our number one priorities, now that we have the protocols from the city and Mayor Lightfoot, is to figure out how we can get our artists back into the studio so we can get them ready to be on the stage when the time is right. As you said, Brandis, we made a very difficult decision to announce the cancellation of our October and winter Nutcracker season. That is a significant financial impact to the Joffrey Ballet. The budget that was approved by our board back in December of 2019 was almost a $23 million budget. And yesterday, our finance committee approved a $10 million budget for our fiscal year that begins on July 1st. So we developed this plan in alignment with Ashley Weeder, our artistic director, myself, and the other members of the administrative team, and an incredibly committed group of board members. So there's alignment in really looking at the next 16 months as being critical for the Joffrey, with a goal to not just survive, but to thrive. And by reducing the budget, we are looking at the only source of revenue being contributed revenue. And we launched a crisis stabilization fund with a goal of $12 million, which is going to enable us to honor our commitment to our 45 company artists during the fiscal year 21. So that means we are going to commit to supporting the artists, which is why we exist. 60 plus years ago, Robert Joffrey created a company. We subsequently have created an academy in the community engagement programs, but we went back to the essence of who the Joffrey Ballet is, and it's about supporting artists. So we will be making other, obviously you can do the math and figure out that we are going to, have to make other adjustments to ensure that we can continue to move forward. with virtual programming, hoping to get the artists back into the studio by September. Yesterday on a Zoom call with 45 artists and other artistic staff members, we identified a huge range of possibilities for ways to deliver programming. We typically do 2 student matinees, historically at the Auditorium Theatre, reaching out over 7,000 Chicago public school students of the Nutcracker, something that we secure underwriting for. Well, obviously that won't happen this year at the Auditorium Theatre or at the Lyric Opera, our new performance home. But we have an opportunity now to reach all of the Chicago public school students and beyond, students that are part of the public systems way outside of Chicago and are going to creatively look at the opportunities of using our black box studio in Joffrey Tower to do this. We are very, very fortunate to own our building at State and Randolph with no debt whatsoever. We have 7 studios. And as I said, our #1 priority is to not get me back into the office, but to create a pathway so that our artists can be in the office, in the studio and working. So tough times, but I'm pleased to share that our $12 million goal with 100% participation from our board in less than a month, we've already raised $6 million. So the good news is halfway there. The challenging news is that we're halfway there. So lots of
Still have halfway to go.
And that said, it's fun to look at my colleague Carlos. Carlos and I have known each other for probably almost 30 years, maybe longer. The Joffrey was at the side of Carlos and other cultural leaders brought together by Angela Power, who is now at the Field Foundation, to create Enrich Chicago. And for the past 6 years, we've been doing the work. We are imperfect. We haven't gotten it all right. We've made mistakes, but there is an incredible community here of committed arts leaders that are focused on creating an anti-racist world in the art space and beyond. And it's over the past 15 weeks, an affinity group of arts leaders, including Carlos and many other colleagues, have been together to continue to talk about the equity work that we've been doing. And this was in advance of, as Benita said, the murder of George Floyd, but continuing with action steps, accountability, and Enrich. If you're a cultural leader out there and you're not aware of the work, I encourage you to explore the work and lean in and step in and be ready to make some mistakes. But if we don't make mistakes, we will not move the meter forward. And
let's talk about Enrich Chicago a little bit more. Greg kind of teed it up, but Carlos, an arts movement or arts-led movement to undo some racism. Can you speak a little bit about that and the challenges ahead for fair representation in Chicago arts, Carlos?
I was going to say that can you guys hear me?
Yes, you're good.
I was going to say that one of the problems is that so many efforts in the past have been, checkoffs. Okay, we did a committee, it's done, let's move on. It's never been seriously done. And in Enrich Chicago, we have had very serious discussions where folks have even cried when they talk about stories. And everyone has to go through anti-racism, training. So it is very serious. It's very open, and the trust gets built. I've known Greg for a long time, but I know Greg a lot better now because of Enrich Chicago, because we can share stories, we can share ideas, and there has to be that trust factor. But I think the group really, of all the committees I've been on that deal with equity and diversity and other stuff, and I've been on so many committees through the years, all of them were junk, just phony. This is a real one. This is real. And I think it's important in which you bare your soul, for the sake of the arts and for the sake of our society, because the arts world should be a leader in this, and it isn't. It hasn't been. So it's important for us to be very honest and frank and, let's all move forward. So it has been a great experience.
Benta, I see you nodding your head. What do you think of racial representation in Chicago arts? It's a full question, I know.
Not much. Look, you know, I'm very proud. I'm a new Chicagoan, and I'm very proud to have just gotten involved with the Chicago Shakespeare Theater and the Merit School of Music. And I have the same, and I've been very honest and candid about this with everybody with whom I've spoken. I have the same dismay here that I had in New York, which I've had in any city I've gone to when I go to the theater, to the opera, to the symphony, which is that I look at the productions and I look at the audiences and I don't see myself. And that's frustrating because anti-racism training wouldn't even be necessary if we had better representation throughout the humanities. The humanities help us to understand one another. The humanities help us to see ourselves and to see our commonality and our shared humanity and other people who don't share our racial background, our religious background, our gender, our sexuality. It is the thing that helps us. It's biblical in the sense that it teaches us about one another and ourselves. And so, you know, I've been frustrated to experience this great divide. And sometimes it's like, for me, because I work also in hip hop and in R&B, sometimes I'm like, well, wait, you know, like I have, you know, I'm a classically trained musician. I have, you know, my cultural world, and then I have my commercial music world, and I don't see where the two of them come together, and yet they ought to. And so, you know, this isn't just a Chicago problem, and I want to be very clear about that. This is a nationwide arts problem that we all need to really dig in and figure out. I mean, I think that we understand. I don't think that there's anything complicated about this. A lot of it has to do with who's funding what, who's producing what. When it comes to the theater, there are not as many diverse folks who are producing theatrical productions. When you look at the donor base and the philanthropic base, there are issues there. And so some of it has to do with how we can do a better job of cultivating the money that is behind these productions, and then translating that. Another part of it is actually educational and what's going on in our schools, and how we are sharing these opportunities with young people who, you know, like if you don't come from a privileged family, or if you don't have access of some kind, then you may not be aware of the richness and the vastness of the theater or the different programs that are available. And so we need to do a much better job than we've done historically in making sure that we're inviting and bringing people in so that they can participate and tell their stories.
Okay, thank you. Anna, I want to bring you back in. We haven't heard from you in a little bit.
That's okay. I'm just writing madly. But what
I know, I'm learning too, taking good notes. So you have a new executive director as well, Brooke Flanagan, the first woman to hold that title in the theater's 45-year history. You know, from your perspective, tell us, you know, what you're seeing and hearing and feeling and thinking about the calls for more racial diversity in Chicago theaters.
I think we're nowhere near where we need to go. I want to say about, I mean, this is actually, I think it's interesting and really kind of edifying and makes me feel good to hear Binta, you talking about the humanities having an effect on the culture of structural racism. I've always looked at it the other way, that until we address structural racism in our system, it's going to be so hard to, you know, we're kind of going against a very, very real, and in my opinion, intentional system. So the new executive director is a really good example. So 5 years ago, when I started as the artistic director, one of the biggest commitment we had was we wanted Steppenwolf's work to look more like the city it served, okay? And that's not code, that's just real. And we started with the art. We started with adding more BIPOC folks to our ensemble, giving BIPOC folks producerial roles, directing positions, writing, you know, being both what we would call behind the table and in front of the table, both of those things. And we are very proud of that, right? We are working really, really hard and it's wonderful because the payoff, of course, is that the work is so much more lush. The audiences are so much more lush. The conversations are exciting. You go to the theater because it makes meaning in your life. A constant repetition of what you see doesn't do that. So this has been really glorious, right? But then what happens is what happened to us at Steppenwolf, which is here we are doing all this work, breaking our arms, patting ourselves on the back. And then we have a crisis. And in that crisis, our executive director is leaving. And 10 days later, COVID hits. And so all of a sudden, you can't do a search because you're in the middle of a $70 million campaign and all hell is broken loose. And right now, right, we've all kind of adjusted to the COVID thing. Here we are doing a panel, being together. Flash back to where we all were March 13th, okay? And what happens in those moments when there's a crisis is the institutional cultural racism just goes right up, okay? Because when you're in a crisis, you go, who can we get? Now, Brooke is the greatest choice in the world. I cannot, as I've said a million times, I'm not hedging my feelings, but you do a search. That is what you do. That is how you change the picture. You have to create opportunities. You have to be foot forward. But what we realized was in that moment, we had to fall back onto what is essentially a pipeline problem that is made from the institutional and structural racism. So what we're doing is this is a real reckoning for us where we're like, okay, shoot, God damn it. Like it's not been easy that's what happened. The good news is that Brooke agrees and we're going to have to really concentrate on making sure who's in our office, who sits on our board, matches the art we're making. So now it just keeps shifting. It keeps shifting. So, and I look at it, you know, Brandis, I feel like whenever, I don't know how these folks feel, but at Steppenwolf, right, I feel like each of the artistic directors has had a mandate. And my mandate with David and now with Brooke is to guarantee the future of the theater. This is why we did the building. This is what, but really, really looking at how to actively, consciously, every day be an anti-racist organization, that guarantees the future of the theater. Because that guarantees relevance, vitality, responsiveness, which is what we all need to have. We need to get more agile and we need to throw these doors open and not lean back on, it was an emergency, you know? It was an emergency, but we need to do better in the next emergency.
And the emergency should teach us all to put ourselves in a position to not.
You learn who you are in those moments. And it was so disappointing. And the only good news is that it was disappointing. Like if we had just done it and been like, and people had called us out and we would, and gone, what are you talking about? That wasn't it. There's been a lot of interrogation of it. And you know what? The upside is it revealed something that we thought we were further along. We thought we were further along. Great. We got to do more work.
Now you know what to work on. Chris, I have not forgotten about you. Hey. So you wrote about online streaming services coming to the aid of Broadway and the theater world. And this kind of gets to the heart of how the arts are funded, or some might say how they're not funded in the United States. Considering the economic fallout from COVID, do you think that it's up to the private sector to provide solutions?
Well, that's a great question. I think that there needs to be some appreciation that these institutions are going to need help. And I think that whether it comes from the private sector, and there's been some movement in that regard, but I also feel a bit like the arts are being forgotten at the state level and the city level, although somewhat less at the city level, I think. And I don't think it's intentional. People have a lot to think about at the moment. Politicians have a lot to worry about. And the arts, for many politicians, you know, through no fault of the arts themselves, represent great risk, because the reality of going to the Nutcracker is that you put yourself, you know, in the company of 2,000 or 3,000 people. And for health reasons, that we all know that's not a desirable thing right now. And we don't know when it will be a desirable thing. So that's not anybody's fault. It's just a reality of this current situation. And I think that those organizations are going to need, you know, some assistance. I mean, it's interesting to contrast it with the restaurant business, for example, which has very expensive lobbyists in Springfield and has managed to engineer a comeback for itself with street closures and that kind of thing. And the arts have become less able to do that. And some of that has to do with the different structure of the two businesses. Frankly, some of it has to do with the arts' own ambivalence about coming back. Restaurants have been dying to get back into business. Artistic organizations that I've talked to, generally less so. Some are vehemently opposed to it. But so that's interesting, I think. But the reality is that they won't exist if there is a long delay, or many of them won't exist anyway, unless they're able to get back into some kind of economic stability. And it's going to take public help, excuse me, and it's going to take private help. There's no question about that.
Okay. Carlos, obviously we all know WTTW has covered this extensively. The Latinx community has been disproportionately hit hard by the coronavirus, and now has the largest number of infected people of any community in our city. Your museum has been impacted personally. One of your staff members sadly lost his brother to COVID-19. Can you speak to what it's been like for your staff and the community that you serve so closely?
Well, 2 points, let's see, Mexican community makes up 80% of Latino community. So it's really the Mexican community has been the hardest hit. So that's an important fact to say. And unfortunately, we're the ones who work in a lot of the jobs that have to be done. We're in the fields, the ones in the fields all day long to make sure the food on the table. We're the ones in grocery stores. We're the ones in a lot of businesses where we're a higher percentage of the folks who work there. So that's very unfortunate. We also have big families. I mean, I always grew up with grandma, grandpa, aunts, uncles. We've always had that. And in this case, it isn't a plus to have that. So it's been hard because all of us know somebody who's passed away or have a friend who's passed away. And it's been very hard for us. It's been very, very, very hard for us. And to me, the fact that immigrants, right now, we should put the immigrants on the platform and say, thank you, because thanks to you, we have food on the table every day, and we forget about that. So there are a lot of heroes out there, a lot of heroes. But I think the immigrants really now, we should always say, thank God for you guys, because you're doing great. And so I just think it just shows you of how Trump is 5,000% wrong on this issue. And so it is very sad. It's a sad time for us. It really is.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear about for many people, obviously, but sorry to hear for you about the losses you and your museum family have experienced. Benta, you're involved in Arts for Illinois. That's the initiative to support artists and artisans left without income. Tell us a little bit about the fund, please.
Well, I mean, it's a growing and moving thing. I unfortunately missed our steering committee meeting yesterday. And so I don't have the latest and greatest. I haven't had a chance to catch up with everybody who's been working so hard. But as you know, Arts for Illinois, it started immediately after COVID. And the idea was to be able to put money in the pockets, some amount of money into the pockets of working artists and artisans in the state of Illinois, throughout this state. And that's important. Why? Because I think I think it was Chris earlier in our conversation who pointed out that many of these folks have day jobs, and in addition to what they do on the theater and the stage, in the studio, and so forth. And as soon as COVID hit, all of those folks lost not only the revenue from touring and performance, but they also lost their day jobs, because oftentimes the day jobs they have are the day jobs that were most affected. You know, people who are working in restaurants and stores and things, like everything that closed. And so the idea behind Arts for Illinois was to raise money and to provide grants to as many people as we possibly could. And I don't have the latest numbers on how much money we have raised in total and how much has been dispensed. But I do believe that we've had a pretty significant impact. Now, here's what's frustrating for us on the steering committee, is that we know that grants of $1,500 are not sufficient. You know, like it's funny that the federal government thinks that a grant of $1,200 is somehow going to make, you know, like the economic losses from COVID minimized for people. But we're practical about it. We know that a grant of $1,500, which I believe is the average size, is not enough on its own to really get people there. But what we've also recognized at the same time is that there's so many different packages and programs, whether at a state, whether for the state or nationally, nonprofits that are looking to be helpful and supportive, that this becomes for a lot of working artists one more thing, one more chink, not a chink, one more source of income that they can rely on to stretch things out until they can begin to get things figured out. But, you know, all of us are gonna have to figure out a way to do more, because these problems don't just go away, you know, because restaurants in a few places are able to begin opening again. I think that everybody needs to be much more practical than what I've been seeing in the broader public about the effects of COVID.
You know, Greg, you talked about artists, you know, dancers in particular, needing to be in the studio. You know, you can send them Marley, which is the floor for folks who don't know. You can send that to their homes, but you know, it's not the same. What about virtual performances? You know, is this a place for presenting new choreography?
Yeah, I think that there is certainly an opportunity to add that to our programming. I certainly think that our long-term goal is to be able to bring audiences together in a shared space. The power, you know, as somebody that's lived their entire life in Chicago and has been at Steppenwolf, you know, for 40 plus years, and seen performances at the National Museum of Mexican Art and concerts across the city. You know, the live arts, or certainly, you know, my commitment has been to giving artists an opportunity to express themselves with that shared experience of an audience. So we get back to the stage, but we certainly are not going to discount anything and look at every possible opportunity that exists to use the spaces that we have. And as I said, we're very fortunate to have a large black box space that we own and that we can program. And we have 45 artists that, you know, are amazing dancers, but they also have lots of other skills and talents. And, you know, they've been creating and producing a lot of the video content that you've seen in our various social media feeds. So the plan is to get them back into the studio and continue to figure out how we can create that kind of work. And then, of course, look at the business model side of it. You know, we need revenue. And if we're not, you know, if we suddenly have, you know, an $8 million box office disappear, we have to figure out, you know, how do we continue to support the art form? And it's the artists, it's the stagehands, it's the choreographers. I am pleased to say that 2 commissions that we had committed to before COVID, we are continuing with. We don't expect that we'll be able to present them for, you know, another year plus. But we want to continue to invest in the art form and the choreographers, knowing that artists across the globe are out of work. So we're exploring it. We're working with Dance USA, which is a national, international dance organization. And actually next week are having some presentations by some leaders in the field that are working on creating digital content and presenting how collectively the dance space might work together. I think times like this, we really realized how important trusted colleagues are locally, nationally, and internationally. And if any city can do it, Chicago does it better. That space of collaboration and partnership is for the most part real. Sometimes it's not, or it hasn't been, but I think there is a real opportunity to work together, specifically to lift up the voices of artists and storytelling. As we move to the lyric opera, we of course want to be able to work more closely with them. We're also in some exciting conversations with our peers at the Miami City Ballet about some ways that we might have two cities that have world-class dance companies work together and reach more audiences and keep things accessible. I think certainly, from my early days working for the city's Department of Cultural Affairs, seems like a lifetime ago, but when Harold Washington was mayor, when I first met Carlos, we talked a lot about access, and I certainly continue to carry that commitment along with the Joffrey Ballet. If we're not relevant and we don't have audiences, none of what we do is really it's not gonna matter. So I have more questions than answers, but in a belief and hope. Darren Walker, who's the president of the Ford Foundation, was on a little webinar last week. We've all attended so many webinars, and he said, we're in the business of hope. And he was talking about foundation leaders, but I would say all of us are in the business of hope. And together, I'm an optimist. We'll come through this different, better, stronger, and with a greater sense of commitment to anti-racism.
Hope is not a bad industry to be in. Anna, we're out of time, so I'm going to let you have the last word. What will the congratulations? What will the the theater going experience be like when we can come back to Steppenwolf? What's that going to be like?
I think everyone is going to have to ask themselves that question as an organization. We kind of joke, although it's certainly gallows humor, that Steppenwolf is not going to be a place where you come and you put a pool noodle on your head and nobody can sit near you. The communion and the shared communion is a huge part of what we do. And I think each organization has to ask themselves to redefine what they're offering the community and figure out when it is time to go back. So like, for instance, for us, it was really important when we did our season reset. You'll see a lot of companies understandably coming back with plays that are small, 2-person, 3-person plays. Certainly a lot of that is economics, but Steppenwolf is all about ensemble work, what happens in a group, the collision of different human experiences. And so we really made a commitment that we aren't going to come back until we can offer Chicago what we have that is special. And I think that will be conversation that we're all having with internally and externally. What does our organization look like when it comes back? How do we return to that communion at Steppenwolf is what we're asking ourselves. And we don't know the answer.
So many questions. So I'm sure we'll all keep talking about this. I know all of you will. Rena, I'm going to bring you back in. And I'm going to say thanks to our panelists, just so that I'm sure that I can do it while I have the opportunity. Thank you all for joining us. Rena, over to you.
Brandis. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Brandis, Carlos, Binta, Anna, and Greg for this important, much needed conversation. We can't wait to see your artists and performers live on stage again. Please stay tuned for our next session in the New Normal series coming soon, and learn more about this fall's first ever and incredibly exciting virtual Chicago Ideas Week coming October 26th through 30th by visiting chicagoideas.com. Thank you and have a great afternoon.